Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Iowa State Cyclones live here on the Voice of College Football Network. I'm your host, Levi Stevenson, also the managing editor over at Wide Right and Natty Light, Iowa State's SB Nation site. Today is a big day. Unfortunately, this will be the last live show I do for the next couple weeks because I'll be about 72 hours time. I will be on my way to Chicago to catch a flight to Dublin. So, that means that football season is right around the corner. A week from Saturday, Iowa State will be playing football in Dublin against Kansas State. Farmageddon, week 0. Probably the biggest week 0 game of the last ever, maybe, unless you want to go way back to the 80s when they did the kickoff classics and stuff like that. But the biggest week 0 game in a very, very long time for college football. Two ranked teams, one of the oldest rivalries in college football, two teams that are expected to contend near the top of the Big 12 or at the top of the Big 12. Big day. But today we are going to be going over kind of what I am projecting as the 2 deep. This is really just going off of what I have seen. Really just what I've seen coming out of media conference, media availabilities, and just kind of I don't know, hearing general discussion around what's going on and stuff like that. This is just kind of my take on it. Some of these are obviously going to be very obvious and straightforward. Quarterback, running back, gonna be pretty quick. Brian said, do we even have a football team? We lost 2 wide receivers to the NFL. I'll tell you what, there has been very few things this offseason that have irritated me more than the national coverage of Iowa State, which has largely been, as Brian has alluded to, has largely summed up to Iowa State lost 2 wide receivers to the NFL, two wide receivers to the NFL. So, well, I guess they're just going to be bad or something, or they're just going to be mediocre. It amazes me how quick a lot of national outlets are to count out Iowa State just because they lost receivers to the NFL. Lest we forget that Matt Campbell has been putting receivers in the NFL his entire tenure at Iowa State. You lost Alan Lazard, the best receiver in school history when he left. Yeah, maybe still, but definitely the best receiver in school history when they left. What'd they do? They replaced him with Hakeem Butler, a former 2-star recruit, and he had maybe the best single season in the history of Iowa State football. Then he left for the NFL, and you bring in LaMichael Petway for 2019, who was very good. He didn't set the world on fire, but he was very good. And then 2019, he graduates, and who shows up in 2020? Xavier Hutchinson, who is now playing for the Houston Texans, and is probably one of the, I would say it's easily one of the 5 greatest receivers in school history. You're maybe splitting hairs between like him and Alan Lazard, but I think he's absolutely up there for the greatest receivers in school history. And now Xavier Hutchinson leaves, and who do you replace him with? Jalen Knoll and Jaden Higgins. Why anybody is continuing to doubt Iowa State's ability to replace receivers at this point is beyond my comprehension. I guess people are just lazy. I don't know. They just don't want to do the work, whatever it is. But that's none of our problem, because everybody that's been watching the show knows that Iowa State has a bunch of very talented receivers, just some that didn't get 90% of the targets last year like Jalen and Jaden did. But they still have a very good quarterback throwing them the ball. They've got a good offensive scheme, and they hopefully will have a good running game to support them. But we will talk about the receivers here in a little bit. So, like I said, we're going to talk about the 2 deep, just kind of how I believe this thing's going to shake out. Absolutely could show up first. They could show up on the field in Dublin in Aviva Stadium, and this thing looks completely different. Like, the receivers are not close to the same. What I think, maybe the offensive line is a completely different thing. We just don't know until they put out a depth chart or until we see them on the football field. It's just so we're taking our best guess. But I think most of these I can feel pretty good about where we're at. But there's other ones that would even this week in media availability, like Taylor Mauser said that they're not 100% sure exactly what they're going to do with the interior group, or on defensively, that they're not 100% sure exactly what the rotation at defensive end looks like. So they're still figuring that out, which means that I'm just taking a guess based on kind of what I've heard, and honestly, straight up kind of a vibe check on just kind of who feels like the right one here based on experience or based on their tape or whatever it is. Um, Dukester's exactly right though. Consistently pump out NFL talent, and everyone still thinks that this is 2013 Iowa State, losing by every game by 30 points. Okay, and like I said, a few of these are going to be pretty obvious and easy. So let's get a couple of those out of the way right away. Obviously, quarterback is going to be Rocco Becht, backed up by Connor Moberly. The Taylor Mauser did get a question about Alex Mansky today, just kind of seeing where he's at. But there the points about Alex Mansky are: one, I am not really as concerned with him about how ready he is today, because I mean, like, I am in that, just in case something happens somehow, and Rocco and Connor, for whatever reason, are not able to play two Saturdays from now. You want him to be able to do something, but Alex Mansky, best case scenario, Alex Mansky sees virtually 0 snaps this entire season as he recovers from elbow surgery, and he's just getting up to speed, getting the system down. This best case scenario, don't see Alex Mansky basically at all this season. But Rocco Becht's the starter, Connor Moberly is the backup. I don't know if I really need to go into too much detail, but that's the case. Rocco is looking to be cement his name firmly in the discussion as the best quarterback in the Big 12. And, not much to that. Anybody that watches this channel is probably well familiar with Rocco Becht. Anybody that's even doesn't watch, there's Iowa State football's in a place right now where you don't really need to be an Iowa State fan to know who Rocco Becht is. This is a great point. If we see Alex Mansky, it better be in a situation where he has been so unbelievably good that he cannot not be on the field. That is the only situation I care to see Alex Mansky. And that actually goes with a number of freshmen in this class that I don't need to see play. Next up, this is another one that's going to go fairly quick. Running back Carson Hansen, Abu Sama. This may be cheating to not pick up a backup behind them. But Carson Hansen, Abu Sama is Iowa State's 1-2 punch, probably one of the better ones, certainly in the Big 12, and I would argue one of the best 1-2 punches in the backfield in college football, really. You have Carson Hansen, the classic north-south runner that's perfectly happy to get the ball and run directly into a linebacker's chest and fall forward for 4 yards every single play over and over and over and over and over again until they get tired of doing it. And then you've got Abu Sama, who needs to work on his vision and seeing his running lanes and being patient about hitting them and then really hitting them once he finds them. But when you get him out in space, he is a home run threat every time he touches the ball in space. If he's able to bounce a run outside and has a lead blocker, there's a decent chance that carry is going for 20, 30 yards or just straight to the house. So big deal that if he can make the next step forward and be a guy that is good enough to be an every down back, but just doesn't have to be. Big room, big availability here as far as room to grow. Brian says Abu Sama breakout season. We know what Hansen can do if Abu Sama gets that vision, set his top end is around Breece Hall. I don't really disagree with that. He's got the athleticism Breece did. If he can develop the vision and running patience that Breece had, I don't see any reason that he can't be that kind of back. He doesn't need to be because he's got Carson Hansen with him, and Breece never really had a true 1-2 punch running with him to sort of that can do that. But Abu can be that good. He can. Jaybird asks, do you know when the team heads to Dublin? I would assume, I don't know for sure. I would assume they probably leave maybe, my guess is maybe Wednesday of next week. I don't know 100% sure. Wednesday or Thursday, I believe. Actually, I want to say Wednesday is when the team plays. I think Brett Bloom might have mentioned it on the last Williams and Bloom podcast. I think the team leaves Wednesday, which would give them a couple days to get situated, kind of get used to the time difference, get a practice in on the field or at a nearby field, whatever it is, and do and get up to speed. I would guess Wednesday is when they head out, and I think that sounds right based on what Brent Bloom was saying. So not a lot to talk about here as far as the kind of starters, the top two, just for thoroughness' sake. Behind them is going to be Dylan Lee, which did not get a lot of carries last year. Pretty much just played in his redshirt game, so he is still a redshirt freshman. He did get a couple goal line carries and got himself a touchdown. Highly touted guy coming out of high school, has great high school tape. The little bit we've seen on him looks pretty good. And from everything we've heard is he's had a very good camp. So we'll just see what his usage looks like. I'm not sure exactly what they're planning on doing with him. I would be a little disappointed if we don't see at least a little bit of two-back personnel, but we'll see what they do with that. River Peppers is behind him. River Peppers is another freshman I really don't need to see this week. I'm good with seeing River Peppers against maybe South Dakota if you can pull away in that game somehow, or like at Arkansas State. I'm good with seeing River Peppers in those. And then Aiden Flores back there as well, who he did get. He got some significant playing time back there. So how they divvy up the carries between Dylan Lee, Aiden Flora, and River Peppers, I'm not sure. It'll be situational, but true freshman in his first ever collegiate game in a different country on a weird time schedule, doesn't really have any sort of like routine built or anything like that. To me, unless River Peppers has been so unbelievably good that you just can't justify leaving him off the field, I don't really need to see River Peppers against Kansas State's front seven. I don't really need to see that. Next up is going to be the receivers. We've got three positions here. These are going to be my projections based on how I think they fit into Iowa State's scheme. But remember that Iowa State kind of moves the receivers all over the place. It's not necessarily that, a starter and a backup could be on the field at the same time, just playing two different positions. This is just kind of, I'm formatting it the way Iowa State typically formats his depth chart. So first up at the X the starter should probably be no surprise here, but that is going to be Chase Soule, the transfer from East Carolina. I think if you look at his tape looks so similar to what Jaden Higgins looked like at Eastern Kentucky. I think you'd be silly to not try to use him basically the same way if he has picked up the offense and is ready to go. His skill set is, the skill set and athleticism are absolutely there. He can be a great receiver for Iowa State, and I expect him, even if it's not against Kansas State where he goes for 8 catches for a $120 or something like that. I think at some point in the season we will see a game where Chase Soule gets 6-8 catches for 120 yards type of thing. We'll see at least a couple 100-yard games out of Chase Soule this season, I think. Backing him up, I have Brett Eskelson. You could probably put Brett Eskelson at any of these three spots, the X, the M, or the Z, just because his skill set just kind of works at a lot of different positions. But I'm going to say he's backing up Chase Soule for right now, but you could absolutely put Chase Soule and Brett Eskelson on the field at the same time and have Brett Eskelson line up in the slot or something like that. At the M position, which is what Iowa State calls their slot receiver, Xavier Townsend, with Eli Green backing him up. Xavier Townsend, the transfer from UCF, which we've talked about a number of times on here, was originally committed to Iowa State as a running back. UCF used him a lot as, on jet sweeps, tunnel screens, bubble screens, stuff in the short and intermediate routes to really get him the ball in space and let him do things after the catch. That's where his skill set fits nicely. But Xavier is absolutely one. You could stick him out in the Z and let him run a deep let him run a deep backside post or something like that. He's got the speed to do that. So, but I really think that here Xavier Townsend makes a lot of sense. Eli Green I think makes a perfect sense as a backup, similar skill wise to Xavier. And he was the backup to Jalen Knoll last year at this exact same position. So Eli Green feels like the obvious one here, assuming he's had a decent camp. At the Z position, so this is the other guy slotted out wide, or the other, I shouldn't say slotted, the other receiver out wide across the formation from Chase Soul in most situations. I have my starter listed as Dominic Overby with Daniel Jackson backing him up. So Dominic Overby coming out of high school, he's like 6'4", 6'5". He was a long jump champion in the state of Utah, runs a sub 11 100-meter dash, which is unbelievable. Especially at his size, that's really, really impressive. And he comes to Iowa State. He played a little bit last season, looked good. Did have one pass that he kind of dropped / it ricocheted off his hands and when it became a pick for Rocco, but otherwise played pretty well. His upside is really intriguing here. Yeah, if he can, get his footwork down and really hone his craft in his short and medium route running and his deep route running as well, obviously. He's a guy that you can stick at a lot of positions. He's tall enough, you probably don't want to put him in the slot necessarily, but you could. But his long speed especially makes him a really, really big asset on deep routes or on like kind of deep crossing routes, things like that, like for first downs. His speed is hugely valuable there. I'm not sure, 100% like what he would look like, catching a drag route and then turning it upfield type of thing, like you saw with Jalen. He's got the speed to do it. Does he have the tight space agility to do that? I don't know. Maybe he does. We just haven't seen a lot of it yet. But I really like Dominic Overby's upside. And from everything I've heard is that he's had a really, really great camp and had really, really good scrimmages up to this point. So I'm going to go with him. Daniel Jackson at the Z there. I did see a comment up here from Brian Yareb that he's a really, really nice route runner that he could fit really good in the M slot. Totally agree. You could absolutely put Daniel Jackson in the M, or he can run alongside Overby or alongside Soul or whatever you want to do. The reason I don't have him starting is because he has not played a lot of football in the last few years. 2023 he was healthy for a decent chunk of the season, missed all of last year. I think it's just a matter of him getting back up to speed. But the ability is absolutely there. Just it's a matter of how quickly he's going to get up to speed, whether or not he's getting a lot of snaps early on. Okay, next up is tight end, which is arguably the best position group on the entire roster. I don't think this is going to be any sort of secret. Ben Bramer and Gabe Burkle leading the way here. Ben Bramer is a 6'5", 6'6" guy that runs a lot like a receiver, just a big, tall receiver. To me, this is a guy where if you can get him in the seam, running vertical at a safety and making a safety deal with his size, or you're running him on something like a corner route where he has the ability to sort of box out a defender, I think that's a big matchup problem that Iowa State can create for a lot of teams. There are not a lot of teams that have a defender that can match up physically with Ben Bramer in the passing game. He's a good blocker too, but his most valuable contribution to the team is going to be as a pass catcher. There's going to be some sets where they line up in 12 personnel with Chase Soul, Xavier Townsend, and Ben Bramer. Ben Bramer split out in the slot with Gabe Burkle attached to the line of scrimmage. They're going to run that at some point. I would be shocked if they didn't run that exact set at some point. This is a great point too here from Brian. People who poo-poo our losses at receiver forget Ben Bramer's hurt and is back healthy. Absolutely. People are completely forgetting that when healthy, Ben Bramer is the best tight end in the Big 12. I don't want to hear if you don't agree, debate a wall. I don't care. Ben Bramer is the best tight end in the Big 12 when he's healthy, and he's a Mackey Award guy. He's a Mackey Award caliber player when healthy. When healthy is the whole kicker, but when he is, and we're going to try to assume that he can stay healthy, he is a massive problems for defenses to game plan around, and he will open up so much in the running game and for the rest of the receiving group too. So these two leading the way, but Gabe Burkle had a great second half last season and had a really, really nice Pop-Tarts Bowl, made a great catch to open on Iowa State's opening drive. Just nice fingertip catch over a couple linebackers. Great play, good player. One of Iowa State's best run blockers. He'll be on the field quite a bit, and I probably with Bramer quite a bit too. You'll see Iowa State in a lot of 11 and 12 personnel with some dipping in. They've got the receiver group I think to do some 10 personnel, some 4 wide type stuff, and I think they've got the tight end personnel to go into 13 or even 14 personnel, as Taylor Mauser mentioned today in his media availability. So we're going to see. So behind Ben Bramer and Gabe Burkle, there is going to be Cooper Alexander. He was a high 3-star tight end coming out of the state of Oklahoma, who Oklahoma themselves, the Sooners, wanted. But Iowa State took, obviously Iowa State got his commitment over the Sooners, and he will factor in here someplace. He's a great receiver, and he's going to be in here somewhere. I don't know exactly how this rotation is. This guy's much like the linebackers, which we'll talk about in a while, where I'm not exactly sure how they're going to shake out who plays when. But that's to me the challenge here is figuring out how to distribute these snaps in a way that makes that takes the best advantage of everybody's talents and abilities. So move to the F back spot, previously known as the Sam Buckner spot or the Dylan Sainer spot or the Steve O'Clott spot, is now the Tyler Moore spot. Tyler Moore is going to be the new F back. He's going to be the tight end that will occasionally, leak out to get something in the flat or whatever, or maybe as on a wheel route, something like that. But he's going to be, when you see Tyler Moore on the field, ideally this is not, him being on the field isn't too much of a tell, but when he's on the field, that's Iowa State getting an extra run blocker out there to try to, get something on a heavy set or something like that. You'll see him on the field for sure. Behind him, I have Trip Walsh. This could be a number of different guys, and they'll just with the way the personnel is, they'll just get the whoever makes sense out there. I put Trip Walsh. It could be Keaton Roscoff. It could be Jack Bjorn. Could be a number of different guys there. That's just my best guess as of right now. Okay, we're moving on to the offensive line, and I'm going to apologize right now, but I kind of cheated here a little bit in that I'm really only giving you who I think are the starters, because I think as of right now, it's pretty tough to pick backups just because I would say it likes to move guys around. But I'm going to do my best to give you a backup. So left tackle is going to be James Neal, I believe. That seems like one that's pretty well slated in there as going to be the starter at left tackle. I think he would have been the starter last year had Jalen Travis not transferred in from Princeton. Obviously had an amazing season. James Neal would have started there. I know the coaching staff really likes him. In my admittedly non-expert opinion on offensive line, I thought he was, in 2023, I thought he was okay. I don't think he was bad. I think he was just okay. And that maybe his skills would be better suited as a guard, but that doesn't mean, in a year of not playing a ton, that he hasn't gotten better, improved his flexibility, improved his mobility, all that. My guess for a backup, if you're going to ask me to guess a backup, my guess would be Tyler Morrow. Tyler Morrow, he's a redshirt senior from Davenport Assumption. He's 6'7", 305. He's been in the program forever. That's my guess as your backup left tackle, but who knows? Left. So I'm gonna do the interior again. I'm cheating on my cheating here, because the interior, even per today's press conference here with Taylor Mauser, on that they basically haven't really decided on what the interior is going to look like as far as where guys play yet. But the interior, I believe, is going to be Dylan Barrett at left guard, Brendan Black at center, Jim Boniface at right guard, with Trevor Burr potentially starting at either of the guard spots. I think it's been mentioned before. Clanton, I believe, mentioned that he did not mention Trevor Burr as being in contention to be center. It's going to be three of these four. with one of the first three being center. That's what we know. The fourth one, whoever isn't starting, is gonna play a bunch, like maybe every other series or something like that. Whatever that looks like. If Trevor Burr is not the starter, he's gonna play a bunch. If Jim Boniface isn't the starter, he's gonna play a bunch. So in a way, it doesn't necessarily matter a ton which of these three starts. It matters where, but it doesn't matter necessarily a ton of where Barrett and Boniface start if they're the starting guards, and because Trevor Burr will rotate in and out for them. If you're going to ask me to pick some more backups behind them, one interesting name that apparently has been killing it is a true freshman by the name of. I'm going to take one shot at this. Vaya Ikakula. I'm gonna go with that. Vaya Ikakula. I feel all right about that pronunciation, but I know. Let's see, because Iowa State usually has pronunciations here. Oh, it's a hear it. Vaya Ikakula per John Walters on the pronunciation guide on the roster. So shout out John Walters, the Godfather. So Vaya Ikakula. I'm going to say he's one of the backups for the guard. Sounds like he's been killing it. Maybe kind of a fun little name to throw in here too. Cool he's from Ohio, true freshman. Which Duke says Brett had as much trouble as me, and honestly, I take good pride in being able to, generally speaking, be pretty good at pronouncing difficult names, but that one threw me a little bit for a loop. Polynesian names can be a little bit tough, but Vaya Ikakula. Anyways, so cool, I think is an interesting name, 6'6", 290. I'm not sure exactly where he fits in or what kind of camp he's had, but I just think he's an interesting name. He was the highest rated recruit or highest rated offensive line recruit of the 2025 class. Interesting name to throw in there, I think. A few other guys. Dontrell Holt has apparently been pretty impressive. He's a redshirt 6'5", 315-pound redshirt freshman from Joplin, Missouri. Gabe Greenlee was listed on the end of season depth chart last year. 6'7", 305 from hometown kid from Ames, Iowa. Dalen Hazard, I'm curious to see, because that was a guy that was kind of, we all thought had a shot to really break out there. He could be your backup at right tackle, left tackle type thing. But and speaking of right tackle, Tyler Miller, he's been around forever. I think he's 6'9", 335. He's a mountain of a human being. That's finally starting to get some recognition as an NFL prospect. But he's been around long enough that he was a starter, or not necessarily a starter, but he played in the Cheez-It Bowl, I believe. So he's been the starter since the Hunter Deckers era. Tyler Miller's been around forever. Not much to say here. He's been pretty reliable. Big dude. Going to go to the NFL at some point. That's Tyler Miller. All right. Now let's move to the defensive side of the ball. At the Leo spot, we've got Miles Mendezoon starting. The backup here, I'll confess here on the defense, I started running out of time a little bit because I realized I was getting these made and I realized it was like 7:01, so I didn't get a backup list for these. Miles Mendezoon, I think, is going to be your starter at Leo. He was listed as the backup at that spot at the end of the season depth chart last year, with Joey Peterson now out the door. Miles Mendezoon is the obvious one to slide in there. My guess is the backup here is going to be either Vontroy Malone. I'm just going to say Vontroy Malone here, the transfer from Tulsa. From what I've heard, is he's had a good camp. It doesn't necessarily matter a ton, who's starting and who's backing up these different spots right off the bat, because in the end, Iowa State is going to go with the hot hand at these spots. If someone is having a good game, they're getting off the line quick, getting around guys, doing a good job in the run fits, they're gonna keep playing. And Iowa State desperately needs to find a couple defensive ends that can really be um, that can be really effective during the game. At least be good enough to help Dominic Orange, do his thing. So, I, that's kind of where that is. But I don't know. It'd be nice if this position group was a little bit better sorted out. This is in my mind, this is the obvious like biggest position battle going on to figure out who's going to be playing these spots because I don't know. I wish they had somebody here that gave me a lot of faith, I think, because you have guys in here like we'll bring them up right now. The other edge here with Akinyi Eziogu and Jace Gilbert. Akinyi Eziogu has the athleticism and the size to be a dominant player. I mean, like a dominant player. They pull it up. I'm pretty sure he's like six. Is he 6'5"? 6'5", 285. He's a super athletic kid. Like Akinyi Eziogu should be a dominant pass rusher. However, at times doesn't like. I don't want to say he's like. I don't want to say he's like a low motor player, but his motor is a little inconsistent in my opinion. Um, so to me, Akinyi Eziogu is in a somewhat similar situation to the way like what David Irving was. Now, I don't think Akinyi Eziogu has the off field issues that David Irving did, but I think it is truly to a certain point a matter of him deciding how good he wants to be. Because I think all the tools are there to be a really, really great player. He's just got to, it's a motor thing. I think with him that you got to keep him going, keep him consistent. And if you do that, I think you got a great pass rusher there. But we got to see it. Jace Gilbert was listed behind him as at that spot at the end of the year depth chart. I don't see any reason to go away from that. I don't have him on here. I think Tomatoa McDonough could be, he'll be in the rotation for this. I would assume Cannon Butler would be the transfer from UNI. I would assume he's involved in some capacity. I don't know exactly where, just because, I think his skills are somewhat limited as far as pass rush goes. Like I don't know if he's as effective of a pass rusher as you want him to necessarily be, but he can be a good run stopper, which is good. So, we'll see how that shakes out. Maybe he turns out to be a great pass rusher and, I'm wrong. That's fine. I'm good with that. Nose tackle, defensive tackle shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Dominic Orange, blocked up, and then backed up by Zamir Hawk. Dominic Orange in most games this season Iowa State plays is going to be the best individual football player on the field. He just is. He's that good. He's a first team All Big 12 player. He could be an All-American. Can't say I'd be incredibly shocked to see him on some sort of like semifinalist list for a postseason, individual award of something like that. I think he's going to be really, really great. And Dominique is another one that I think, he's slowly done a great job of kind of rebuilding his body a little bit because he came in, he was massive. He's trimmed down quite a bit. Helped his athleticism, helped his mobility, helped his stamina, and now he can be a truly dominant force in the middle of that defensive line. So, that one's pretty well wrapped up. Zamir Hawk played a bunch of snaps last year too. Looked really good a lot of the time. Yeah. Okay, on to the linebackers. Now, the linebackers, I have them broken down into basically two groups, into a starters group and a second group. The tricky part here is these guys are all going to know how to play every spot. They're going to move around. They're going to play different spots during the game. They're going to rotate fairly frequently, but, we talked about this last night. Nobody's heard this yet. We just recorded it last night, but on those recent recording of Down the Pipe and Natty Light, which is our Kansas State preview that will publish next week, we talked about how even though Iowa State has this massive stable of, a dozen guys that have started games in the Big 12 at linebacker, you need to find a group or two. You need to find like two groups that you really like that are they're going to take up most of your snaps, and then find situational spots for the other guys. So this is kind of how I have it broken down. And to be straight up, the second group and first group could absolutely be flexible, but this is kind of how I see it shaking out right now. So I think your first group of linebackers is Caleb Bacon, Cooper Ebel, and Will McLaughlin. If I were putting them on the field right now, how I'm arranging these depends entirely on how I feel about Cooper Ebel playing middle linebacker, since he usually played outside last year. I think he was a will. Because I want Caleb Bacon on the edge. I know that. I want Caleb Bacon to be able to play as an outside linebacker to take advantage of his athleticism. And I want him to be able to be a good, a pass rusher. Will McLaughlin has largely played on the outside in his career, but I think he's got the skill and the experience to play middle linebacker. So if you feel really great about Cooper Ebel at linebacker, I think you go Caleb Bacon and Will McLaughlin on either side with Cooper in the middle. Would it shock me or hurt my feelings to see Will McLaughlin in the middle and Cooper Ebel outside? No. Would it, I would personally like to have Caleb Bacon on the edge, but could Caleb Bacon start at middle linebacker? Absolutely. Absolutely could there. And you have Cooper Ebel and Will McLaughlin outside. Those three could play anywhere you wanted. Pick a spot for any three of them. Second group, I believe. Oh, it's a ticker. Dang it. Spoiled it. All right. Second group is Carson Willich, Caleb Brazina, and Zach Lovett, I believe. Again, this is really hard because you have a lot of names to pick from here. I'm just going with, Caleb Brazina played awesome last year. He was great. He only got to play, the first 8 games, but he was really, really good, even as a true freshman middle linebacker for those 8 games. I think it'd be a huge mistake to not have him in your main rotation. He's a great linebacker. He's going to continue to be a great linebacker. Carson Willich was reportedly going to be the starter going into last season before he tore his ACL in fall camp or in spring practice. I think it was in fall camp that Carson Willich tore his ACL. Assuming he's 100% back and healthy, I don't see any reason that you wouldn't have him in, the main rotation there if he's up to speed. If he's not, he could be a situational guy to start and then eventually work his way up into that second group. But I think that makes a lot of sense. Zach Lovett is the third one here. He was hurt for a lot of last year, like everybody else. But he has played a lot of snaps for Iowa State at linebacker. He's played good snaps, was especially good as a QB spy in a lot of situations. I think just based on experience, I think this one makes a lot of sense. You could easily slide in someone like Jacob Emming, who played I think most games last year. Jacob Emming played a lot. You could bring in a redshirt freshman, Mason Miller, who I was, coming out of high school, I was very impressed with his tape. I think I even may have put out a prediction that said I thought Caleb Brazina, Mason Miller was going to be like the next great Iowa State linebacker duo. And I'm still generally on board with that. Caleb Brazina is already checked out there as he's going to be really good. So we'll see if Mason Miller jumps up. John Klosterman played a bunch of good snaps for Iowa State last year before he got hurt, or fairly. I think it was after the 4th game he tore his ACL or broke his leg or something like that. He had a leg injury. John Klosterman will fit in here someplace. I don't know exactly where, but he's going to fit in here somewhere. Rylan Barnes is going to fit in here somewhere. Played a bunch of pretty good snaps at middle linebacker last year, even as a walk-on. And then you've got Bo Goodwin, who played a bunch of really good snaps last year and started a couple games down the stretch after injuries had long taken their hold of the room. He played a lot of good snaps for Iowa State in the second half and in the bowl game as well. I would be shocked if you don't see a good, healthy dose of Bo Goodwin. And I honestly, frankly, I debated between having Zach Lovett and Bo Goodwin in this second group, just because I think maybe even Carson Willich, because he didn't play a lot. He didn't play last year. There's a lot of names. I don't know exactly how they're gonna figure out the rotation. I feel very confident that Colby Cratch will get it figured out. This is just my guess at it. Okay, moving on to a very, very easy one to put together. Cornerback one is going to be Jontez Williams. I know we've talked about it on the show before, and I think I've mentioned on another podcast. Jontez Williams last year allowed a passer rating of 19 when targeted, which is 20 points better than if a quarterback were to throw the ball directly into the dirt every single play. Which means that in general, it is better to throw an incompletion than to even try throwing at not even an incompletion, but an automatic no contest, no receiver in the area incompletion than it is to throw in the direction of Jontez Williams. When he is in the field, that third of the field is largely just kind of eliminated from play. Just is. He's somehow, for some reason, people kept throwing the ball at him last year. I don't know why. Had a pick in 4 straight games, could have had a 5th. Not much to talk about here. David Coffey is a guy that is a young kid that has gotten a lot of kind of talk in the offseason. He was listed as Jontez's backup last year. Don't see any reason to change that. I think he'll be there unless he is in contention for the second spot. But I'm going to assume that he is, just behind there, behind Jontez right there. It will be there for when Jontez needs a breather. Now, the cornerback across from him is really the only position of minor controversy on the team as of right now, which is Trey Bell, I believe is going to be the starter here just based on experience. And, he's a good player. He's experienced. He's played a lot of college football. I think he'll be there. I would expect this to be a mostly 50-50 share of snaps between him and Quentin Taylor Jr. It's hard to say exactly because we're not there. From what I understand is Benny Nagoya may have gotten banged up a little bit in camp. So, we may not see him in Dublin. Maybe he would be contention here for a backup spot. But right now, I think Trey Bell, Quentin Taylor makes a lot of sense. With Trey Bell getting the nod, at least to start this first opening game. Safeties are going to be fairly well known here, and we'll talk about a few of the backups. I don't have them listed on my little banner here, but on a few of the backups on a few of these spots, I have a backup in mind. So my middle safety here is going to be Jamison Patton. This was the spot previously occupied by Beau Freeler. For Iowa State, it's the safety, it's the middle safety, obviously, but it's also the safety that kind of acts as the air traffic controller, basically at the back end of the defense that's moving guys around. Jamison Patton has been in the program for a long time. He's played a lot of snaps for Iowa State, played a lot of games for Iowa State. Very, very experienced, veteran, reliable. This spot screams Jamison Patton to me. This is where you want to put your most experienced guy that can really direct traffic back there. I think that makes a lot of sense. A backup candidate here, I think would probably be Marcus Neal Jr. Back there. I know he played a bunch last year. I think that's a candidate for back here, probably backing up Jamison Patton. Next up is the back safety, Tayshaun James. Got beat a few times. Against, I want to say it was Kansas. Got beat partially because he was having to kind of cover for some other people, but really turned it on late in the season. Had that peanut punch forced fumble against Miami in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. Played really well the last few games of the season. I think he's an easy one to slot in here. I think this guy's going to start probably. Backup here, from what I understand, the backup here is probably, I'm going to say the backup here is Drew Surges, only because Drew Surges did not play much at all last year, and he'll need to get back up to speed. I think Drew Surges here as his back safety makes some sense. Free safety, Jeremiah Cooper, easy one to slot in there. The interesting wrinkle here is that per Dion Broomfield, he has been getting reps at corner. Now, is that as the second corner across from Jontez? Is that as a nickel? My guess is it's probably more as a nickel than as guarding like the team's second wide receiver on the edge, or on the outside, I should say. But he's athletic enough to be moved all over the place. I think we will see a return to form on Jeremiah Cooper for what we saw the first couple years where he was he was an All-American. And I think I think we'll see him return to form. I'm intrigued by the idea of him playing some in the nickel because the guy that's going to be backing him up, I'm fairly confident the guy backing him up is going to be Kajon Cummings Coleman, who is a redshirt freshman out of Minneapolis. Um, he has gotten a lot of hype coming out of camp as a guy that's had big time practices, big time scrimmages, making big plays all over the field. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw something in here where you've got Patton James and Kajon Cummings Coleman playing safety, and then Jeremiah Cooper also in the game down playing nickel corner. I would not be surprised to see something like that. I think there's there's a lot of promise here. You've got a veteran back here in Jeremiah Cooper that's played a million games for Iowa State and can be back there to direct traffic. And then you've got a few young guys there. Jamison Patton's also been back there. You have two good veteran presence and consistent veteran presences back there at the back end of the pass defense where you feel pretty good about what's going on back there and you're not really all too worried about it. I did not build out specific banners for special teams because kicker is obviously going to be Kyle Conradi. I don't think there's any controversy there. It's obviously going to be Kyle Conradi. Punter going to be Tyler Perkins. He's done a good job his whole career. It's going to be Tyler Perkins. And kicker returner and punt returner, I have no earthly idea. I have a couple names I think are interesting. I think Xavier Townsend is a very interesting candidate to return kicks. I think you could look at River Peppers. I think you could look in the direction of maybe if he's healthy, maybe a Zay Robinson. Maybe there's a corner that looks, that you really like. Maybe Jeremiah Cooper can return kicks. I think you'd probably want to avoid that as much as you can to make sure you keep your veterans, especially at the back end. But they also ran Jalen Knoll out there for kick and punt returns, and he was fine. Kick and punt returns are largely just going to be whoever shows the most promise there, or at least is the most dependable there. When they've got a guy that can be a game changer back there, like Jalen Knoll was so good, especially on punt returns last year, but he had a number of big returns that helped flip the field, give Iowa State short fields. I hope they don't go back to their ways of just kind of throwing up the white flag on returns and just kind of doing whatever and letting whatever happen. But I think there's probably some names in here that I think are really, really interesting. Eli Green, maybe, but if I were just going to take a shot in the dark, I think my guess would be Xavier Townsend to return kicks and punts, but all depends on who they feel confident with, and we don't really ever hear much of anything about that on who's going to be doing that. So that's really it for the specialists there. So anyways, that is my my projected depth chart for the 2020 to open the 2025 season to start with. Anyways, we'll get more information after the first game and who's playing what spots, what kind of rotation we're using at offensive line, defensive end, linebacker, things like that. But this is kind of where I think we're at. I think for the most part, the two deep, we generally know who's there. We just don't necessarily know exactly where they're at, type of thing. Which I think is a good thing. The middle of Iowa State's roster, the depth is as good as it's probably ever been. And we're going to find out if Chase Soule and Xavier Townsend and Abu Sama, Ben Bramer, if those guys can be the high-end elite talent that we think they can be. So it's going to be really fun. It's going to be exciting. But I think that's going to wrap up our depth chart discussion for today. Now, before we wrap up the show, a couple housekeeping items. Like I said, I will not be in the country the next 2 Tuesdays. I'm going to record a full Kansas State preview, maybe tomorrow, and that'll post next week. I did record an Iowa State kind of team preview for the main channel with Mark this afternoon. So that will also be available. But I'm going to try to, I think for this, I think my format for these previews is going to be kind of 3 keys on each side of the ball, and maybe kind of players to watch for those. I haven't 100% decided on my format just yet, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. So we'll have something pre-recorded for you next week as far as a preview goes. As far as a recap goes, I'm not 100% sure what's going to happen. Maybe, I might be able to record something in Ireland, but we'll just have to see. We'll kind of play it by ear and see what my schedule looks like when I'm there. Really going to be trying to spend most of it on vacation with my family, and my wife. So, but otherwise, I appreciate everybody for tuning in, for sticking through this whole off season, which by the next time I talk to you live on this channel, we will be deep into this thing. We will be actually 2 games into this. We'll have played Kansas State and South Dakota by the next time I talk to you live. So, and actually, you know what I might do now that I think about it, because I get back on Wednesday. So what I may do is move my show that week to Thursday and do it Thursday night. That might be it. So potentially, so next week there won't be a live show. The week after, keep an eye out. I might just move it to Thursday instead of having it on Tuesday. So everybody, thank you for sticking out this long off season. We're finally here at football season. Week from Saturday, Iowa State plays in Dublin against Kansas State in the Farmageddon rivalry game. It's been long, but everybody, thank you for watching. We will see you all again in a couple weeks. Go Cyclones.